It's been 1 year since the first known coronavirus cases emerged in Wuhan, China, with nearly every country in the world now impacted. Tens of millions have been infected. More than 1.5 million have died. There are still many unanswered questions. Where did it start? How did it cross from animals to humans? And when will it all end? I'm Tom Mackenzie in Beijing. You're watching a Bloomberg Quick Take Pandemic Special. Let's start in Wuhan, the city where COVID-19 first cut its deadly swathe. Bloomberg News' Emma O'Brien went to the Huanan wet market, the site of what may have been the first super spreader event.
These guys are following us as we leave the market. This is the site of the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan in China. It's, for many people, ground zero of the new coronavirus. This is where the very first cases or cluster took place among stall holders on the bottom floor here. As you can see, it's boarded up. They've got these decorative panels covering it. You can't get inside, and there is a lot of security around here. They don't want people looking in or having anything to do with this place right now. We've just left the Huanan seafood market, or the site of what was the seafood market, and we definitely did get some attention from security. Was it the first place where the virus emerged? We still don't know, 1 year on, and scientists, a World Health Organization committee, other groups of epidemiologists are still trying to find that out. We visited 2 markets on the outskirts of the city that Huanan stallholders had been moved to. Once again, people very, very reticent to talk. Security coming upon us almost immediately, telling us we can't film, telling us we can't talk to people. People that we did spoke to, some of them confirmed they had moved from Huanan, mostly around March and April, but nobody wanted to talk about that period beforehand or said they didn't remember. So obviously a climate of fear really, and really feeling that stigma. Very anxious that we're here, so we're going to move along. So we're in one of Wuhan's most popular going out areas. There's lots of hip restaurants around here, breweries, bars. People are out and about, they're socializing, they're eating. Lots of people wearing masks still.
我觉得我不担心了，我觉得武汉市是最安全的城市现在。会带，因为现在有流感，不光光是疫情，流感也会。而且你进店里面，他会要求你戴口罩，你如果不戴，他会让你出来的。
我个人觉得他肯定不是武汉来的，因为现在不管是从科学的角度，还是说我们现实感受角度，如果是从武汉来的话，现在在全球疫情就不可能发生的这么严重了呀。
Talking to people here tonight in Wuhan, it's really interesting to hear their stories 1 year on from what triggered the world's first really harsh lockdown and the first really intense virus wave with lots of people dying and a real onslaught of cases on the hospitals here. People still talk about being affected by the lockdown, both mentally and economically.
早期的时候有过这么一些疑虑，对，然后国内的也有啊，有的地方说武汉来的货怕是有病毒啊。我至少觉得现在武汉市民的各方面的防护、防疫，包括自己的这种意识、防范的意识，是得到了长足的提高。
Behind me is one of the 2 temporary hospitals that were built here in Wuhan shortly after the lockdown started. Now this one here took in more than 2,000 coronavirus patients half of them critical cases, and they were treated here in temporary buildings built in quite famously under 2 weeks by Chinese construction workers. You can't get inside, there's security. These aren't being used anymore and have been since about April when they were shut down and the pandemic situation here in Wuhan. And nobody that we've spoken to thought it began here in this central Chinese city. It must have come from somewhere else, and there are a variety of theories, which just really shows that, you know, this still really is a mystery as to where and how this virus and pandemic started. But it does definitely feel that 1 year on from when this all started, things are moving back to normal and that people are moving on here. China is also stepping up efforts to distance itself from the virus. After basically shutting the WHO out of Wuhan all year, it's now mounting a campaign to cast doubt over China being the source of the virus. I've just been inside the Wuhan Cultural Exhibition Hall, where this temporary exhibition about the pandemic here is taking place, and it's pretty overwhelming. Inside, there's a wealth of exhibitions, dioramas with hospital beds, 3D holograms of doctors working on patients, mannequins of military people bringing medical supplies, big pictures of Xi Jinping, and a real emphasis on his role in containing this pandemic. You can tell that they're really trying to pull at heartstrings and really sort of push the narrative that this city and this country survived and defeated this virus.
经过这次疫情之后，我觉得那几个月会很难受，但是过过来以后，我觉得我比原来更坚强了。但是就像你们今天去看那个展览一样，我还是不能触碰。触碰以后，我心里我还是觉得会很难过，因为我是从这个时间过来的。
In many ways, China has little incentive to find out how this all started. With the virus all but eliminated from its own shores, the public anger at Beijing's early concealments and missteps eased, and the economy on track to take over the US in 2028.
With me now is Emma OBrien from Bloomberg News here in Beijing, who's recently returned from a trip to Wuhan. Emma, what was it like on the ground in the city?
It was quite fascinating to go to this place where, you know, almost a year ago now, these first coronavirus cases emerged that it's now blown up into this global pandemic. So to actually be sort of in that site of history was just quite fascinating, particularly for a journalist like me. Temperature checks in some places, but you could go to restaurants, cafes, people were out and about. It does feel very much like a normal, thriving even Chinese city right now.
The local government in Wuhan, they covered it up, the original outbreak at the beginning, at least the first few weeks. To what extent, to what degree has the government now tried to rewrite that history?
Well, I think that you're seeing that on a national scale in China, that revision and rewriting of history. They definitely, from the beginning, tried to cover up those snafus, those mistakes, the fact they weren't on top of this early enough. We spent quite a lot of time at what is basically an exhibition, a historical exhibition of the virus. And it's a fascinating example of Chinese, I guess, propaganda, and it was very much a sort of dramatic, emotional sort of attempt to portray the way the city has been affected. You know, you can't forget that they did have this very strict 3-month lockdown, one of the world's first lockdowns that are now becoming quite commonplace. So there are scars on the ground there.
And those scars existed for the economy. To what extent has the economy then rebounded?
Well, I think it mirrors a lot what we're seeing more widely in China, right? China is back to growth, one of the only major economies that is, because it has contained the virus through various measures, mass testing, still deploying quite stringent lockdowns in parts of the country, zeroing in on, you know, single virus cases and trying to snuff them out. I mean, we met with a number of business people in Wuhan, and business seemed to be thriving, really. We talked to a restaurant owner who said that things were back to normal. He's just opened a new restaurant, for example. Definitely signs of a bustling, if cautiously emerging city, I would say. But people are still sort of getting over that, still coming to terms with it, as they probably are in other parts of the world as well. This will have a long tail.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. Now, the city of Wuhan, the government of China may be trying to move on from the virus and the pandemic, but scientists say it's crucial that we find out more about how the virus emerged, the origins of the virus.
It is critically important that we understand the nature of emerging infections and be able to anticipate more accurately and specifically what and where infections may emerge. We may never, in retrospect, know the answer with certainty about SARS-CoV-2, but we should put in place the scientific instrumentality and collaboration that will enable us to learn any future origin of an emerging infection.
Okay, I'm joined now by Jason Gale from Bloomberg News, who's been investigating the origins of the virus since the outbreak a year ago. Jason, where do things stand in terms of our understanding of the origins of the virus and the links then to Wuhan?
Yeah, Tom, we still don't know very much after a year that this virus has been known to have circulated. We do know that the closest relatives to the SARS-CoV-2 virus are found in horseshoe bats, a microbat that was present in caves in Yunnan, some 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. So how it got from these microbats, these horseshoe bats in Yunnan province to Wuhan, more than 1,000 miles away, nobody really knows.
And Jason, a number of Chinese officials have suggested that the origins of the virus are not linked to Wuhan, not even linked to China. Some have suggested it's come from Italy. Some have suggested that the first cases were in the US. Some have suggested that it's come in via frozen seafood from overseas. Do any of these theories that China is pushing stand up? Do any of them have any scientific evidence or basis? Or is this an example of China trying to muddy the waters about the origins of this virus?
Well, I think much has yet to be really elucidated around the origins. But what we do know is that scientists are able to look at the evolution of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and look at the mutations that have occurred as the virus has evolved and circulated in people, and to look back and at that molecular clock, at what the progenitors of the virus might have been, the earliest common ancestors of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And they find that it all traces back to Wuhan.
You've talked about the gaps in our knowledge about this virus, and we've heard now that the World Health Organization will be sending a team to China, to Wuhan, at some point in the near future to try and piece the pieces of the puzzle together and give us more clarity. What can we expect to hear and see from the WHO? What are they realistically able, do you think, to be able to find out once they're on the ground here that will help flesh out this story for us?
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned the WHO. There's also a separate team that is being convened by the Lancet Commission. Both teams will be looking to identify the earliest known SARS-CoV-2 cases and to get as much information about those cases as possible, what their occupations were, whether there was any exposure to wild animals. And so that will be fairly critical in trying to piece together the evolution of this virus. They'll also be very interested in understanding more about the horseshoe bats in Yunnan and what other animals might have been in contact or interacted with these bats.
China's President Xi Jinping has hailed his country's swift and transparent response to the deadly coronavirus, first discovered on its soil. But some of the families of the thousands who died are still fighting for answers from the government.
还可以说话的时候，我父亲那时候跟我说了嘛，他说儿子啊，他说爸爸不想死，知道吗？他说爸爸不想死，他说你去求求医生救救我。
Zhang Hai's father died on February 1st after contracting the coronavirus in a Wuhan hospital. He had femoral surgery a few weeks earlier, and the pair had traveled from Shenzhen not knowing about the virus outbreak taking place.
他们从头开始 撒谎瞒报已经成性了，知道吗？你指望他说实话，那是很难的，很难的。
Zhang filed a lawsuit with the local court, but the court didn't accept his papers. He has filed with the provincial and Supreme Courts too. He says the police have harassed him and his social media accounts have been shut. But Zhang is not alone.
我如果知道了，我不会把我孩子送去送死的，这相当于是我亲手把我孩子送去送死的，知道吧？
Yang Min's only daughter was undergoing chemotherapy at a hospital in Wuhan. Tian Yuxi developed a fever in mid-January, and the 24-year-old was shuttled from hospital to hospital before being admitted to an ICU.
我们这些人跟他们生活的是两个社会，是两个社会，因为怎么样，就是我们这一块人的那伤痛那个是抹不掉的。 不管说表面上有多繁华多那个，底下埋藏的东西你是看不到的。
She too has sued the government, but was told the case couldn't be filed.
一个政府你做错了事情，你给我一个说法，给我一个道歉，或者说你犯了什么错该怎么那个，对吧？有个呢完全没有什么任何表示都没有，坚持不懈的往下走，然后不停的就是把我们控制起来。 不让我们说，然后这个事情就不存在了吗？这个事实就不存在了吗？不可能啊！
Zhang Hai has yet to hold a funeral for his father, whose ashes remain in the crematorium a year after his death.
哪怕到最后为止，所有的其他的人都屈服于他们的压力之下，哪怕剩我一个人。 我也要去追责，也要去发声，知道吗？我不可能让我的父亲就这么无声无息的离开这个世界，不然的话，我肯定对不起我爸爸。
Since the virus first emerged in Wuhan, more than 1.5 million people have died. Behind that devastating figure are countless human stories of grief and suffering. Here are just a few of them.
There was no way to prepare for this. The city, I personally wasn't prepared for it. The funeral home wasn't prepared for it, and neither was the city of New York.
I would love to pick up Grandma now, but I don't have the accommodation to get her right now.
It was surreal. It was almost like the end of the world feeling for me. And I said, I can't believe it. The rain, I'll never forget that day. And people were just waiting for cases to be released to them in the rain. That photograph, it's a constant reminder of the battle, the war, the craziness that we've all went through trying to help the city and our families that live here.
Respira bene, tranquillo. Bravo. Allora, il sentimento diciamo che è stato un sentimento di unità. E ci siamo sentiti veramente uniti in quello che stavamo affrontando, e nonostante le difficoltà che abbiamo vissuto, però è stato quello che ci ha portato poi a superare quella che è stata la prima ondata, come viene detto, no?
Esto es una guerra sin armas. Esto no se sabe ni de dónde viene, dónde va, ni de qué. Pero yo quiero tener esperanzas y pensar en que va a haber algo positivo que nos ayude.
Es decir, había muchas veces que tú entrabas en una residencia y sabías que esa persona no se había podido despedir, que no había tenido posibilidad ni siquiera casi ni de tener contacto desde hacía meses con nadie de su familia. Y eso al final es duro.
Eu acho que foi o negacionismo de tudo que está acontecendo, com a falta de respeito que ainda continua acontecendo com nós vítimas da Covid. Porque nós pais, irmãos, filhos, amigos que perdemos pessoas, somos todos vítimas dessa Covid. E hoje o que eu vejo? Que apesar de um certo controle, que ainda não existe um certo controle, ainda continuam as autoridades negando a gravidade dessa doença.
किसी देश में अगर कोई जैसे बमबारी हो जाए, पूरा तहस नहस हो जाए, ऐसा सिचुएशन आ गया इस कोरोना वायरस की। ये समझ लीजिए कि एकदम से तहस नहस हो गया, सब कुछ ना खाने के रह गए, ना पीने के, ना कोई पैसा, ना कुछ, पूरी व्यवस्था एकदम खराब हो गई है। हम लोगों के घर की आर्थिक स्थिति तो एकदम समझ लीजिए बहुत गई गुजरी है।
A year since the virus first emerged, in many countries deaths are spiking. Millions are locked down and economies are tanking. Many people are asking, what's the way out of this mess? Vaccinations have started, but they're only effective if enough people get them, and some remain skeptical about taking a shot.
Not really knowing, not knowing the side effects, not knowing if you have an allergic reaction and what will cause the allergic reaction. Being vaccinated first, I think is a good idea because we are frontline workers and we are working with the public. But I'm like most people, a little skeptical about it, but I work in a very vulnerable population. So if I have to get it, if it's mandated by my job to get it, then I'll get it. But if I can wait until June, then I will wait until June.
Whenever it's available for us to take it, I would be the first in line.
I will be in line to get it for sure.
I'm not for it and I'm not against it. I just feel like certain things aren't necessary.
No, I'm really excited about it. I mean, I'm 64, I have diabetes. You know, I'm definitely willing to take the vaccine.
I don't feel comfortable with it. I don't know. I'm not taking something that somebody put together all of a sudden. I mean, I don't want to be a guinea pig in somebody's game neither. But at the same time, if there's a cure, God bless the cure, but you got to have a result before you have an outcome.
I think it's very controversial, and I think everybody should do what's best for them. I think for me, I have a lot more homework to do personally. I already had COVID in the spring, and I still have the antibodies. You know, since I've had it and I have the antibodies, should I still be getting it?
I don't know if it's the beginning of the end of COVID, just because it's a cure for COVID. It's not really a cure for stupidity and selfishness.
I've been very distressed by all the people who aren't following the guidelines. We know from looking at other countries where people are following them, New Zealand, Australia, China, and elsewhere, that they're living a very normal life without vaccines. So I feel hopeful about the vaccine, but very dispirited that our country is in this position and can't live without it.
Let's get back to Jason Gale, Bloomberg News' senior health editor. Jason, where do we stand in terms of the production, the development of vaccines that will help to end this pandemic?
It's going to require mass immunization for there to be any real effect on the pandemic. We're going to need at least 60 to 70% of people in the population having immunity to the SARS-CoV-2 virus in order to suppress its circulation and to really dampen the spread. Tony Fauci has said it may take until at least mid-2021, possibly later, for sufficient people to have been vaccinated for there to be any real return to what we could consider to be a normal life.
And part of that will come down to the production challenges that some of these vaccine makers are facing and the distribution challenges as well.
Indeed, we know that many of these vaccines, at least two of them, the messenger RNA vaccines, require very, very cold temperatures in the supply chain, and that is a logistical challenge in itself, ensuring that the vaccines remain at these very cold temperatures right up until where the point at which they're administered. Most of the vaccines are going to be required to be administered in 2 doses about a month apart. So there are considerable logistical challenges in administering the vaccines and ensuring mass immunization.
Okay, Jason, just finally, when you pull all this information together, you pull all your experience together covering and tracking the developments, the evolution of this virus, what is your assessment of when we can expect to return to something that looks like normal?
That's a very difficult question, Tom. Look, it clearly is going to depend on immunization and getting the whole world immunized against the SARS-CoV-2 virus is going to be a massive challenge, because at the moment, essentially rich countries have taken a great deal of the global supply of vaccines, but it's going to require everybody, all 7 billion plus of us, to be immunized for the virus to be sufficiently suppressed to see this threat no longer with us. And of course, that is going to take a longer time unless we look at ways to be more generous and share this global asset, these vaccines.
Jason, thank you very much indeed. Jason Gale, Bloomberg News' senior health editor, who's been covering this pandemic from the very start. You've been watching Bloomberg Quick Takes Pandemic Special. I'm Tom McKenzie in Beijing. Thanks for watching and goodbye.